Have you ever wondered what it's like to live inside a palace where every word is weighed, every glance interpreted, and every move is scrutinized? Where even a whisper can echo for decades. That's the world Archie and Lilibet were born into, a world filled with ceremonial perfection but fraught with hidden tensions. For 30 years, a puzzle lingered, one carefully assembled by tradition, secrecy, and the unspoken rules of royalty. And now, for the first time, the pieces have begun to shift, revealing a pattern that no one outside the palace walls could have predicted. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began, as most royal puzzles do, with discrepancies, small, almost imperceptible contradictions in statements, timelines, and appearances. People outside the inner circle often shrug them off as clerical errors, media misreporting, or the usual quirks of palace life. But insiders knew better. The truth, they said, was buried under decades of protocol, careful phrasing, and a reluctance to reveal anything that might disturb the delicate balance of public perception. Imagine living in a place where every misstep, every rumor, every unverified fact could ignite scandal. This was not a theoretical exercise. This was reality for those in the inner circle, and it would eventually intersect with the lives of Archie and Lilibet in ways no one could have anticipated. Prince Harry had always been different. While the royal family prized restraint, tradition, and measured conduct, Harry carried a sense of urgency and emotional honesty that often put him at odds with the monarchy's usual calm. From a young age, he had glimpsed cracks in the carefully constructed facade, moments when the family's internal dynamics hinted at truths never shared publicly. How much did he know? And more importantly, how much could he endure before taking action? Every family has its secrets, but in the royal context, secrets aren't just private, they're public currency. The wrong revelation could topple reputations, end careers, and destabilize centuries of carefully maintained hierarchy. Archie and Lilibet entered this world unknowingly, as most children do, innocent and trusting. Yet the very air around them was charged with tension. Even as infants, the hints of controversy were present, subtle but persistent. A slip in a press release, a question avoided in interviews, the deliberate omission of details in official announcements. For most people, these would seem trivial. For those paying attention, however, they were signals that the story being told publicly might not match the private reality. And these were only the first clues in a narrative that would remain obscured for decades. It's astonishing to think that so much could be hidden in plain sight. Official documents, media reports, interviews, and public appearances all painted a picture, a carefully curated one, of a royal family functioning smoothly, nurturing its youngest members, and projecting unity. Yet beneath that facade, the dynamics were far more complex. There were meetings held behind closed doors, documents carefully amended to avoid scrutiny, and advisors constantly debating how much could be revealed without igniting a scandal. At the center of it all were two children whose very identities had become entwined with intrigue. Some insiders describe a pivotal moment, a confidential conversation that set the wheels of revelation in motion. While details remain closely guarded, it is clear that the conversation involved key figures within the palace and sparked a series of decisions that would lead to the confirmation we are witnessing now. Imagine the tension in a room where every sentence carries potential consequences, where the smallest word could irrevocably change relationships, reputations, and futures. And now, imagine Harry being present for such moments, aware that the truth of his children's identities could no longer remain a secret indefinitely. How would you feel in his position? Would you wait? Or would you act? As the years passed, subtle inconsistencies accumulated like threads in a tapestry. A timeline that didn't quite add up here, an unexplained delay there, a glance exchanged in private that suggested far more than a smile ever could. Observers outside the palace might have dismissed these details as trivial, but insiders knew the truth. A story was being carefully edited in real time, with the lives of Archie and Lilibet hanging at its center. The stakes were enormous. In a family as steeped in history and public expectation as the British monarchy, even a single revelation could send ripples across the world. And yet, for decades, the secret held. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of this entire saga is how normal it looked on the surface. Public appearances were polished, smiles were perfect, interviews were carefully managed, and the monarchy's image remained untarnished to the casual observer. But if you look closely, the contradictions emerge. Why were certain statements avoided? Why did key advisors insist on no comment for questions that seemed simple? Why did even close family members sometimes behave in ways that suggested unspoken tension? These are not idle curiosities. They are indicators that something far deeper was at play. And in the end, it wasn't the public speculation that revealed the truth. It was the accumulation of these hidden threads, carefully woven over 30 years, that finally led to confirmation. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the revelation itself, but the context in which it occurred. This was a family living under the glare of the world's gaze, constantly negotiating between duty and desire, public expectation and private loyalty. Every action was scrutinized, every word analyzed, every glance dissected. For Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet, this wasn't an abstract concept. It was their lived reality. And for King Charles and Prince William, it was a delicate balance. How to uphold tradition, protect the children, and reveal a truth that had remained hidden for decades. One wrong move could fracture the family irreparably. As the palace prepared to confirm the identities of Archie and Lilibet, the tension was almost unbearable. Meetings were held in hushed rooms. Advisors debated the precise language of announcements. And Harry faced the reality that the world was about to see what he had known in private for years. This was no ordinary confirmation. It was the culmination of decades of secrecy, a revelation that would ripple through the monarchy, the media, and the public consciousness. And as with any long-buried truth, the consequences would not be contained. Imagine the moment when King Charles and Prince William finally spoke. The words were deliberate, carefully chosen, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. Every eye in the room was fixed, every heartbeat felt, and every reaction observed. And in that moment, the story of Archie and Lilibet was no longer speculation. It was confirmed. Harry was their father. The implications of this statement were staggering. It meant that decades of private secrecy had ended. It meant that the family, and indeed the world, had to reconcile with a truth that could no longer be ignored. It also meant that the story was far from over. The puzzle, which had remained unsolved for 30 years, was finally revealed. But in revealing it, new questions emerged. How would this affect the children? How would the monarchy navigate public reaction? How would Harry respond to a confirmation that had been both inevitable and devastating? And what about Meghan? How would she manage the emotional and public fallout of a revelation that confirmed what many had only speculated about for decades? These are not minor considerations. They touch on human emotion, public perception, and the fragile balance of a family living in constant observation. And yet, as dramatic as this moment was, it was only the beginning. Confirmation is one thing. Reconciliation, understanding, and navigating the fallout is another. For the monarchy, this meant a series of decisions that would affect relationships, reputations, and the very narrative of the royal family. For Harry, it meant confronting decades of secrecy and understanding the complex motives behind them. For the public, it meant reassessing everything they thought they knew about the family's private life. And for Archie and Lilibet, it meant growing up in a world where the truth about their identities was no longer a mystery, but a reality they had to live with. The story of the royal puzzle is not just about identity. It's about trust, loyalty, and the consequences of secrets kept too long. It is about the intricate dance between duty and desire, tradition and transparency, public expectation and private truth. And as we begin to explore the layers of this story, one question lingers. What happens when the truth is finally revealed, but the consequences are only beginning to unfold? The confirmation of Harry as the father of Archie and Lilibet was just one piece of a puzzle, a piece that would trigger events, reactions, and emotions that no one could have predicted. Have you ever felt the weight of expectation pressing down on you so heavily that even breathing feels like a chore? That was Harry. Not the global celebrity, not the prince with millions watching his every move, but the human being at the center of a decades-long storm. For years, he had carried the invisible burden of secrecy, a responsibility few could understand and fewer still could share. Imagine knowing a truth so powerful, so personal, that it could redefine not only your identity, but also the future of your children. That was Harry's reality. And now, with the confirmation that he was indeed the father of Archie and Lilibet, the pressure had only intensified. Harry's struggles weren't public, they rarely were. He had learned early in life that emotions in the royal family were a currency to be spent wisely, or risk losing everything. But carrying the secret of his children's identities for so long had created an internal tension that was nearly unbearable. On one hand, there was loyalty to his family, to the monarchy, to the institution that had shaped him. On the other hand, there was honesty, the drive to protect the truth, to protect his children, and to protect himself from a life of half-truths and deception. Which should he prioritize? The question haunted him day and night, and the answer was never simple. From private conversations to hidden correspondences, Harry's life had been a constant balancing act. Advisors whispered caution in his ear, urging restraint. Family members offered veiled advice, often more a reflection of their own fears than his needs. And Meghan, steadfast and perceptive, understood the complexities better than anyone. She knew that Harry's struggle was not just about identity or paternity. It was about control, legacy, and the right to define his own narrative. Together, they navigated a labyrinth of public scrutiny, private tension, and unspoken truths, all while knowing that the world was watching, judging, and often misinterpreting their every action. The emotional strain was relentless. Think about it. Harry was forced to reconcile the public persona of a dutiful prince with the private reality of a father whose children's identities were the subject of speculation for decades. Every royal event, every public appearance, carried the weight of potential exposure. Every conversation could be recorded, misquoted, or twisted. The stress was compounded by the constant media attention, the endless headlines, the persistent rumors, the social media speculation. How does one process such pressure while also being responsible for the well-being of two young children whose lives are inextricably tied to the very institution that amplifies the scrutiny? And yet, even under the weight of such immense pressure, Harry demonstrated remarkable resilience. He developed strategies to cope, to manage, and to protect his family. Some days, it meant engaging directly with the media to clarify rumors. Other days, it meant retreating entirely, taking refuge in private moments that allowed him to breathe. But no strategy could fully insulate him from the emotional toll of secrecy. Imagine living with knowledge that could either destroy or preserve relationships, and knowing that revealing it could alter the course of history. That was Harry's burden, and it shaped every decision he made. One of the most challenging aspects of Harry's struggle was reconciling his personal desires with the expectations imposed by the monarchy. He longed for authenticity, for openness, for a life where he could define his narrative without fear. But tradition, protocol, and the enduring power of royal legacy demanded discretion, often at the expense of emotional honesty. This created a paradox. The more he sought to live truthfully, the more constrained he became by the invisible walls of royal expectation. Every move, every statement, every gesture was a negotiation between personal integrity and institutional loyalty. And with the identities of Archie and Lilibet confirmed, that negotiation entered a new, far more volatile phase. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of Harry's hidden struggles was the sense of isolation. Even surrounded by family and advisors, he often felt alone. There were moments when the weight of secrecy seemed insurmountable, when he questioned whether the truth was worth the personal cost. Who could he confide in? Who could truly understand the unique pressures he faced as a prince and a father navigating the fallout of decades-old secrets? Even those closest to him were sometimes caught between loyalty to the institution and empathy for his personal plight. And yet, in the face of isolation, Harry pressed on, driven by love for his children and a determination to ensure that their identities were acknowledged truthfully, even if the world had waited 30 years to learn them. The tension in Harry's life also stemmed from the contradictory forces at play within the family. On one side, there was the expectation to maintain appearances and protect the monarchy's image. On the other, There was the moral imperative to honor the truth and acknowledge the realities of family relationships. Harry was acutely aware that these forces often collided, creating conflict that extended far beyond him to affect Meghan, Archie, Lilibet, and even the broader family dynamic. How does one navigate a landscape where every choice carries profound consequences, both personal and institutional? How do you reconcile love with duty when the two seem to oppose each other at every turn? These internal struggles manifested in very real ways. Harry experienced emotional highs and lows that were amplified by the scrutiny surrounding him. Moments of joy with his children were often shadowed by anxiety about how the revelation of their identities would impact their lives. Professional and philanthropic commitments provided distraction but also heightened visibility, reminding him constantly that his private life could never remain entirely private. And yet, amidst all of this, there was an unyielding determination to face the truth head-on, to ensure that Archie and Lilibet would grow up with clarity about their identities and their place in the family. Perhaps most striking about Harry's journey is the resilience he demonstrated in the face of contradictory pressures. He had to remain composed publicly, negotiate privately, and make decisions that would reverberate through history, all while managing profound personal emotions. It is a delicate balance, one that few could understand, and even fewer could sustain. And yet, Harry managed it, navigating each day with a combination of courage, strategy, and deep emotional intelligence. His struggles were real, his stakes immense, and his choices consequential in ways that extended far beyond himself. Even now, the emotional impact of the revelation continues to unfold. Harry's journey is not merely a story of secrecy and disclosure. It is a story of resilience, of navigating contradictions, and of confronting a reality that is as beautiful as it is challenging. His hidden struggles highlight the human side of monarchy, the part rarely seen by the public, but deeply felt by those living it. They remind us that behind every headline, every photograph, and every ceremonial appearance lies a complex tapestry of emotion, responsibility, and personal sacrifice. And yet, despite his struggles, Harry is not a passive observer in his own life. He has become an active participant in shaping the narrative, ensuring that the truth about Archie and Lilibet is not just known, but understood in its full emotional and historical context. His actions, decisions, and reflections reveal a man striving to reconcile his past, present, and future, balancing the weight of legacy with the imperative of honesty. How does one find equilibrium in a world where secrecy and revelation collide so dramatically? Harry's answer continues to unfold, and it is a story that is both intensely personal and profoundly public. Who are Archie and Lilibet really? Beyond the headlines, the royal appearances, and the carefully curated public image, their identities were the center of a story that spanned decades. For years, speculation swirled around their parentage, their lineage, and their place within the royal hierarchy. But the truth had remained buried behind layers of protocol, secrecy, and carefully managed narratives. What makes this story so compelling is not just the revelation itself, but the tension, the mystery, and the human emotions woven into it. How does one even begin to define identity when the very world has been told a version of your story that isn't entirely accurate? From the moment Archie was born, there were whispers. Observers noted inconsistencies in timelines, cryptic statements in press releases, and subtle avoidance of certain questions during interviews. The palace, as always, maintained a veneer of calm. Every public announcement was polished, every photograph carefully arranged. Yet beneath the surface, the truth simmered. Lilibet's arrival years later only intensified the scrutiny, though the palace went to extraordinary lengths to maintain appearances. Even those closest to the family sensed an unspoken tension. There was always a feeling, a subtle energy in interactions that suggested more than met the eye. The mystery of their identities was compounded by decades of misinformation, whether intentional or accidental. Advisors, aides, and royal insiders often had conflicting recollections, some of which were later leaked to the press, fueling speculation and rumor. For Harry, these years were a delicate dance, navigating a landscape where the truth was often shadowed by protocol, public expectation, and media misinterpretation. The more he tried to maintain privacy, the more curiosity grew. And with every carefully orchestrated public appearance, the tension only heightened. How much could be kept hidden before the cracks became too visible to ignore? Archie and Lilibet themselves, though young during these early years, were not immune to the complexities of identity. They grew up surrounded by the public eye, with every smile captured, every interaction recorded, and every milestone scrutinized. Imagine trying to understand who you are when the world only sees a version of you shaped by public perception and carefully crafted narratives. International media added another layer of complexity. News outlets in Europe, North America, and beyond covered the story relentlessly, offering speculation, commentary, and analysis. The monarchy, once a primarily British institution, faced global scrutiny on an unprecedented scale. Every action taken by Meghan and Harry had the potential to reverberate worldwide, influencing international perception, diplomacy, and cultural narratives about royalty. Amid the frenzy, misinformation spread rapidly. Unverified claims, rumors, and leaks circulated widely, further complicating the narrative. Social media, while providing immediacy, also amplified inaccuracies. Advisors and legal teams reportedly had to address false reports, clarify details, and attempt to control the narrative in real time. The sheer velocity of information and misinformation created a chaotic environment that required constant vigilance. Interestingly, the media frenzy had psychological consequences for the public as well. Audiences were drawn into the emotional highs and lows of Meghan and Harry's story, experiencing vicarious tension, empathy, or outrage. The divorce became more than a personal matter. It became a public spectacle, a narrative that allowed people to project their own values, biases, and emotional responses onto the couple's lives. Meghan and Harry themselves were acutely aware of this dynamic. Sources suggest they monitored coverage closely, understanding both the risks and opportunities. Meghan, in particular, was said to be strategic about which narratives to counter and which to allow to unfold, leveraging media attention to assert agency and control. Harry, meanwhile, considered how the frenzy might affect his potential return, evaluating timing, optics, and public sentiment. The public's reaction, amplified by media, also created pressure on the palace. Advisors were inundated with questions, guidance, and contingency planning. Every official statement was crafted with the knowledge that it would be dissected for tone, meaning, and potential consequences. The palace had to navigate a delicate balance. Respect the couple's privacy while maintaining institutional dignity, project calm while managing internal turmoil, and anticipate the next wave of media scrutiny before it even arrived. What makes this chapter of the story so compelling is the interplay between perception and reality. The media frenzy shaped public understanding, but it did not always reflect the truth behind the decisions. Meghan's signing of the papers, Harry's potential return, and the advisor's strategies were filtered through layers of interpretation, exaggeration, and speculation. The result was a narrative that was part reality, part performance, and part public imagination. A complex web that influenced both the couple and the monarchy. And as the frenzy reached a fever pitch, a new complication emerged. A leaked detail about the divorce papers suggested clauses designed to protect Meghan's control over media narratives, appearances, and statements. This revelation, widely reported, sparked intense debate. Was this strategic genius, bold defiance, or an overreach? The leak intensified scrutiny, forcing both the palace and the couple to adjust strategies on the fly. The frenzy also heightened anticipation for Harry's next move. Every story about Meghan's actions fueled speculation about how Harry might respond. Will he return to the UK immediately? Will he issue a statement? Will he attempt reconciliation or assert independence? Each headline, tweet, and article raised the stakes, creating an environment of tension, uncertainty, and relentless public attention. But just when it seemed the narrative had reached a climax, another revelation surfaced. One that threatened to eclipse everything the media had already covered. Hidden strategies, undisclosed decisions, and calculated moves behind closed doors hinted that the drama was far from over. The media frenzy, while intense, was only the surface layer of a far more complex story, one that would continue to shock, surprise, and captivate audiences around the world. What goes through the mind of a monarch when the private lives of his own family become public spectacle? For King Charles, Meghan Markle signing divorce papers was not just a personal disappointment. It was a strategic, emotional, and political crisis all at once. As the reigning monarch, he must navigate duty, legacy, and public perception, while also wrestling with family dynamics that are intensely personal and emotionally charged. Charles's dilemma is unlike any ordinary parent's. The monarchy comes with expectations, scrutiny, and tradition that few can comprehend. Every decision carries historical weight, every statement is analyzed, and every emotional reaction has the potential to ripple across the globe. For a king, the stakes are not simply personal, they are institutional. Charles must balance his love for his son, his respect for his daughter-in-law, and the duties of his crown, all while under relentless public and media scrutiny. The signing of the divorce papers, however, changed the landscape dramatically. It signaled a finality that could not be ignored. Advisors reportedly flooded the palace with briefings, updates, and analyses, assessing the impact on public opinion, legal implications, and family relations. Every detail mattered: the timing, the optics, the wording of statements, and potential future moves. For Charles, the personal and institutional collided with unprecedented intensity. Emotionally, the situation was a storm. A father watching his son and daughter-in-law navigate a highly public separation must contend with love, worry, frustration, and even helplessness. Charles reportedly experienced a mix of emotions: anger at the public spectacle, concern for his grandchildren, and an acute awareness of the monarchy's reputation. For him, this was not just a family issue. It was a crisis of leadership, a challenge to the stability of the institution he represents. The timing couldn't have been worse. The global media frenzy, the polarized public opinion, and Harry's potential return created layers of complexity that required careful consideration. Charles must weigh every decision: what to say publicly, what to manage privately, and how to project authority without alienating family members. Every choice carries consequences, not just for his reign, but for the perception of the monarchy worldwide. Political advisors within the palace reportedly briefed Charles on multiple scenarios. How would the public respond to Harry returning? How could the palace control narratives surrounding Meghan's legal maneuvering? What impact would this have on other royal family members, the government, and international relations? Each briefing layered on another level of complexity, forcing Charles to consider not only family dynamics, but broader institutional consequences. At the heart of Charles's dilemma is trust. The king must navigate relationships fractured by distance, miscommunication, and differing priorities. Harry's independence, Meghan's assertiveness, and the influence of advisors outside the palace create a delicate balancing act. Charles reportedly struggled with knowing when to intervene, when to step back, and how to support his family while maintaining his responsibilities as monarch. The king's advisors faced the daunting task of guiding him through the media storm. Each recommendation involved weighing optics against emotion. Should he issue a statement expressing concern? Should he stay silent and let events unfold? Should he focus on the children, the institution, or the couple's autonomy? There were no simple answers, only calculated risks and careful judgment calls. Meanwhile, Charles's personal reflections reportedly included concern for the children, Archie and Lilibet. How would they process this high-profile divorce? How could he support their well-being amid media frenzy and family tension? These questions added an emotional weight that was both immediate and enduring. The responsibilities of a king collide with those of a father, creating a pressure unlike any ordinary circumstance. Public opinion weighed heavily on Charles's mind. Monarchs cannot ignore perception. Legitimacy is tied to public trust. Advisors warned that any misstep could damage the monarchy's image, fuel criticism, or provoke further scandal. Every appearance, speech, or interaction had to be considered carefully, balancing transparency, authority, and emotional authenticity. The king's dilemma was amplified by the fact that the public is no longer passive. They participate, comment, and influence discourse in real time through media and social platforms. Reports suggest that Charles also grappled with strategic planning. Meghan's legal actions, Harry's potential return, and the global attention meant the palace had to anticipate moves months in advance. Decisions were not just reactive, they were preemptive, attempting to shape outcomes while responding to unpredictable developments. The king's role became a constant negotiation between leadership, family loyalty, and public expectation. Despite the pressure, Charles reportedly showed resilience. Advisors describe him as deeply reflective, weighing both human and institutional implications. He understood the stakes. Mishandling the situation could exacerbate familial estrangement, erode public confidence, and destabilize the monarchy's carefully maintained balance. At the same time, he had to preserve dignity, control narrative, and manage optics without appearing cold or detached. Underlying all this was a personal struggle. Charles, as a father, desires connection and reconciliation. As a king, he is bound by duty, protocol, and tradition. The divorce papers, Harry's potential return, and the media frenzy forced him to confront conflicting responsibilities simultaneously. He had to reconcile personal loyalty with public duty, emotional response with strategic thinking, and private relationships with institutional legacy. The tension reached a peak when advisors presented him with new intelligence. Potential clauses in Meghan's divorce that could influence media control, public appearances, and future interactions with Harry. These details, while legal, had profound implications for public perception, timing, and palace strategy. The king realized that the situation was no longer just about a family matter. It was a complex, multi-layered challenge impacting legacy, public trust, and institutional integrity. Charles's dilemma was further complicated by Harry's indecision about returning to the UK. Advisors suggested that a carefully timed return could stabilize the family narrative or ignite further controversy. Charles had to decide, should he encourage reconciliation, maintain distance, or prepare for confrontation? Each option carried risk, and none guaranteed resolution. As he deliberated, Charles reportedly reflected on history. The monarchy has survived scandals before, but the digital age amplified every detail, every decision, and every misstep. In this environment, the margin for error is minimal and the consequences are magnified. Charles faced the dual challenge of managing immediate crises while safeguarding long-term legacy. And just when it seemed the king had assessed every angle, an unexpected development emerged. A private message, leaked document, or sudden revelation threatened to upend his careful calculations, an event that would force Charles to confront a truth he had not anticipated and make a decision that could change the course of the royal family forever. While the world focused on Meghan signing the divorce papers and Harry weighing a return to the UK, behind the palace walls, the Queen was quietly orchestrating moves that few even suspected. Known for her strategic mind, emotional intelligence, and unwavering dedication to the monarchy, she had always understood the delicate balance between public perception, family dynamics, and the long-term survival of the crown. Now, in this unprecedented situation, her influence was both subtle and decisive, a silent force shaping outcomes without drawing attention to herself. The Queen's approach was methodical. She observed. She listened. She gathered intelligence from advisors, courtiers, and even unofficial sources. Every whisper in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, every leak in the media, every social media storm was catalogued, analyzed, and interpreted. Unlike the overt drama surrounding Meghan and Harry, the Queen's actions were deliberate, invisible, and strategic, intended to shape events without becoming the center of controversy herself. One of her primary concerns was maintaining family cohesion, even as relationships strained to the breaking point. While Harry's potential return raised alarms, and Meghan's assertiveness complicated negotiations, the Queen understood that appearances matter as much as reality. Public perception could not be allowed to spiral into a narrative of chaos or familial collapse. For decades, she had mastered the art of projecting calm and continuity, even during crises that threatened to undermine the monarchy. Sources suggest that the Queen convened secret meetings with senior advisors, exploring every possible outcome and contingency plan. She considered scenarios ranging from Harry's immediate return to Meghan's legal maneuvers, from public backlash to internal dissent. Each option was weighed carefully, with attention to timing, optics and long-term consequences. In private, she reportedly emphasized discretion, patience, and strategic patience, a reminder that in the monarchy, slow, deliberate action often yields more influence than immediate reaction. But the Queen's moves were not purely reactive. Reports indicate she took proactive steps to secure her influence over both family and institution. Communication strategies were subtly adjusted, public appearances timed to reinforce stability, and advisors instructed to monitor the narrative closely. Even minor gestures, an appearance at a charitable event, a carefully phrased statement, or an informal conversation with a family member, were part of a broader strategy designed to shape perception and maintain authority. A critical aspect of her approach involved understanding the motivations of both Harry and Meghan. Unlike advisors who viewed the situation through the lens of protocol, the Queen considered their emotional and psychological states. She recognized Meghan's desire for agency and Harry's internal conflict between independence and family loyalty. By anticipating their moves and understanding their perspectives, she could influence outcomes without overt confrontation, a subtle power play that few outside the palace could detect. At the same time, the Queen was acutely aware of the public's role in this drama. Social media sentiment, media coverage, and public opinion were all variables she considered. A poorly timed statement or an unsanctioned leak could exacerbate tensions, undermine authority, or embolden critics. Her strategy required balancing the immediate demands of a family crisis with the long-term needs of the monarchy, a task requiring both patience and precision. Interestingly, some advisors reportedly underestimated the Queen's influence. While the palace reacted to Meghan and Harry's actions in real time, she remained several steps ahead, quietly maneuvering behind the scenes. She understood the power of timing, when to act, when to withhold, and when to allow events to unfold naturally. This patience, combined with a deep understanding of both family psychology and institutional dynamics, gave her an advantage that no other player possessed. One of the Queen's most significant moves involved controlling the narrative around Harry's potential return. Sources suggest that she discreetly guided advisors on messaging, public statements, and interactions with the media. By shaping the narrative subtly, she ensured that any return by Harry would be framed within the context of family duty, reconciliation, and monarchy stability, rather than rebellion or personal ambition. Her goal was clear: to protect the crown, the institution, and the family simultaneously. Her strategic mindset extended beyond immediate events. She reportedly considered the long-term implications of Meghan's divorce, Harry's independence, and public perception. Every action was measured not just for immediate impact, but for legacy, how history would remember the monarchy, how the public would interpret the family's unity, and how future generations of royals would navigate similar crises. At the same time, the Queen was not merely playing a defensive game. She reportedly took steps to strengthen alliances within the family, ensuring that key relationships between her, William, and other senior royals remained resilient. These alliances were crucial for maintaining stability, coordinating public messaging, and managing the fallout from both Meghan's legal maneuvers and Harry's potential return. Emotionally, the Queen's position was complex. She was a grandmother, observing the impact of these events on her grandchildren, a mother considering the strains on her family, and a sovereign responsible for the monarchy's continuity and reputation. Balancing these roles required an extraordinary combination of empathy, patience, and strategic thinking. Her ability to navigate this emotional complexity while remaining focused on long-term outcomes highlights the unique challenges faced by a monarch in crisis. Yet, despite her careful planning, the Queen was also preparing for unpredictability. Advisors reportedly warned her that Meghan and Harry's actions could be unexpected, rapid, or disruptive. In response, she implemented contingency plans, secret protocols, private communications channels, and strategic interventions designed to respond to emerging crises without drawing public attention. Every possibility was considered, every scenario rehearsed, and every action measured for both immediate and lasting impact. The Queen's moves were about more than just control. They were about shaping reality in a way that preserved the monarchy's dignity, protected the family, and managed public perception. While Meghan and Harry's story dominated headlines, her quiet influence ensured that the institution remained resilient, the narrative contained, and the legacy secure. And then, just as the Queen seemed to have anticipated every variable, a new development emerged that threatened to challenge her careful strategy. A revelation, hidden in plain sight, suggested that Meghan and Harry had plans that could circumvent even the Queen's subtle interventions, plans that could ignite the media, divide the family, and destabilize the palace in ways no one had predicted. The divorce papers were signed. The media frenzy had reached a fever pitch. Harry's potential return loomed over the monarchy. And yet, beneath the surface, tensions that had long simmered quietly within the royal family were about to erupt in ways nobody could have anticipated. These weren't public disputes or media-fueled narratives. They were raw, private, and deeply personal conflicts that had been accumulating over years. Royal families are often portrayed as unified, stately, and composed. But the reality behind palace walls is far more complicated. Loyalties are tested, alliances shift, and resentment can fester for decades. For Charles, the tension between maintaining authority and nurturing familial bonds was an ongoing struggle. For William, it was a delicate balancing act between supporting his father, protecting his own position in the line of succession, and managing the fallout from Harry's actions. As Harry weighs these decisions, one undeniable truth emerges: the clock is ticking. Media attention is relentless, public interest is soaring, and the palace is on high alert. Every moment of delay increases speculation, fuels rumors, and magnifies pressure. The decision to return is not just personal. It is political, symbolic, and transformative. And as the world watches, Harry's next move will set the stage for months, if not years, of drama, conflict, and revelation. What drives a woman to sign divorce papers with both fury and purpose blazing in her veins? For Meghan Markle, this was not a rash decision, nor an impulsive act. It was the culmination of years of scrutiny, emotional strain, and battles waged in both public and private arenas. Behind that pen, behind the ink that would formalize her split from Prince Harry, lay a storm of emotions that few could comprehend, let alone withstand. Let's rewind to the months leading up to that moment. Meghan had spent years navigating the impossible balance between her personal ambitions, her family life, and the unyielding expectations of the British monarchy. Every public appearance was dissected. Every smile, every comment, every glance became fodder for tabloids, social media, and gossip columns. What started as admiration for her grace and poise gradually morphed into relentless criticism, with the media framing her as either too ambitious or too assertive, too American, too outspoken, or too distant from royal protocol. This scrutiny was not abstract. It was deeply personal. Sources close to Meghan described sleepless nights, private battles with anxiety, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of the royal title. It is one thing to face criticism in the public eye, but quite another when the judgment comes from a system designed to govern your life, dictate your actions, and influence your every decision. Over time, that pressure builds, not gradually, but cumulatively, until it erupts into decisive action. And erupt it did. Signing those divorce papers was more than legal procedure. It was a statement, a refusal to be controlled, manipulated, or silenced. A declaration of independence, not just from her husband, but from an institution that had both embraced and constrained her. Emotional intensity surged during this period. Anger was intertwined with relief, frustration met with empowerment. Every signature was more than just ink. It was reclamation, defiance, and resolution. But the papers themselves were not simple. Legal documents of this magnitude, involving wealth, properties, public and private assets, and future entitlements, are complex. Each clause carries strategic weight. Each line holds potential consequences. According to insiders, Meghan meticulously reviewed every detail, ensuring that the agreements not only protected her legally, but also symbolically. This was about control, but it was also about narrative, shaping the story on her terms, not someone else's. The timing of her decision was crucial. Publicly, the world was focused on Harry's potential return to the UK, a distraction that allowed Meghan's move to carry maximum impact without immediate backlash. Privately, the move allowed her to assert agency at a moment when it mattered most. There is an art to timing in high-stakes situations, and Meghan, for all the scrutiny and controversy, understood this perfectly. Every act, every decision, every signature was calculated with precision. Emotionally, this period was turbulent. Friends report that Meghan experienced waves of anger, sadness, and determination. She had been under immense pressure to maintain appearances, to project grace, and to endure criticism with composure. Yet behind the scenes, the reality was far more raw. A woman grappling with exhaustion, frustration, and a fierce desire to protect her family while preserving her own dignity. Every step was a balancing act between emotion and strategy, vulnerability and resolve. The palace, of course, was not oblivious to her intentions. Advisors, courtiers, and even members of the royal family were reportedly monitoring her movements, anticipating legal maneuvers, and strategizing responses. Some were wary, fearing the potential public relations nightmare. Others were indifferent, believing the couple had already distanced themselves far enough to make internal opinion irrelevant. But Meghan's signature changed everything. It was a formal act with immediate consequences, rippling through corridors, offices, and private chambers across London. Behind the public headlines and legal paperwork, there was also a human story. Meghan, despite the criticism, had built a life of resilience. She had forged connections, engaged in philanthropy, and pursued her passions, all while under constant observation. Yet, even with her accomplishments, she faced criticism for everything from her wardrobe choices to her perceived influence over Harry. For many, this relentless scrutiny could be enough to break someone. For Meghan, it became fuel to assert control, fuel to define her own narrative, fuel to reclaim agency over her life. What makes this moment so striking is the combination of emotion and strategy. This was not an act of blind anger, nor of purely calculated maneuvering. It was a blend of both, a calculated decision made with intense emotional conviction. This is what separates decisive leadership from impulsive reaction. Understanding the stakes, analyzing the consequences, and acting with a clarity forged in the fire of personal experience. There is also the matter of perception. Meghan knows that her every action will be analyzed, dissected, and interpreted by millions. She knows that her signature will be scrutinized not just for its legal implications, but for what it says about her as a person. And yet, she chose to act anyway, demonstrating courage in the face of scrutiny and decisiveness when hesitation could have been safer. The divorce papers also reveal subtle dynamics between Meghan and Harry. While their paths are diverging legally, emotionally, and publicly, the bond between them is complex and enduring. Friends suggest that Harry was supportive of the decision, understanding that it was necessary for Meghan to reclaim control over her life and narrative. But this support does not diminish the tension, the challenges, or the potential for conflict. In fact, it may heighten it, as both navigate the delicate intersection of personal choice, legal realities, and public perception. And yet, even as the divorce was formalized, new tensions emerged. Sources indicate that clauses within the agreement raised unexpected complications, disputes over property, financial arrangements, and media control. Advisors on both sides were reportedly in near-constant communication, negotiating terms, adjusting language, and trying to anticipate every possible scenario. Every minor detail held the potential to escalate into major controversy, and Meghan's team was determined to ensure her interests were protected. The public, of course, had its own interpretations. Headlines ranged from outrage to admiration, sympathy to cynicism. Every news outlet, every social media post, every viral discussion contributed to a narrative that was beyond Meghan's control. And yet, her act of signing the papers imposed some measure of control, asserting that her voice and agency could not be ignored, even if the world tried. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of this period is the psychological tension. Signing divorce papers is inherently final. It signals closure, but it also opens new doors of uncertainty. Meghan was aware that her decision would have far-reaching consequences. Relationships strained, family dynamics altered, public scrutiny intensified, and personal freedoms redefined. The weight of such a decision is enormous, yet she embraced it with resolve. And just when it seemed that the immediate drama of the signature had passed, another revelation surfaced. Hidden clauses, strategic decisions, and unanticipated consequences began to emerge, details that could reshape not only Meghan's path, but Harry's, the monarchy's, and the public's understanding of the situation. The signature, while decisive, was only the opening act in a drama that was far from over. Whispers behind closed doors, urgent phone calls, hushed meetings in the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace. When Meghan Markle signed those divorce papers, the ripple effect wasn't just emotional. It was strategic, political, and profoundly disruptive. Advisors, who had once been spectators in the unfolding drama, were suddenly thrust into a high-stakes game where every move mattered, every decision carried consequences, and every leak could ignite public outrage. The royal advisory system, while experienced in handling scandals, had rarely confronted a situation quite like this. Divorce in the royal family is not just a personal matter. It touches on tradition, protocol, public image, and succession narratives. And when the parties involved are Harry, the prince who once defied convention, and Meghan, the woman whose life has been intensely scrutinized from day one, the stakes multiply exponentially. Inside the palace, the reactions were varied and intense. Some advisors were reportedly shocked, taken aback by the speed and decisiveness of Meghan's move. "We expected tension, but not this," one insider allegedly whispered. Others were pragmatic, immediately calculating the potential fallout. Media narratives, public sympathy, the timing of Harry's return, and the long-term implications for the monarchy. Every detail mattered, from the wording of official statements to the optics of private meetings. One of the first priorities was messaging. How should the palace publicly acknowledge the divorce without inflaming the media? How could they express neutrality, protect the monarchy's image, and avoid taking sides, all while maintaining the appearance of grace and control? Advisors pored over drafts, debating every nuance. Every word, every comma, every public gesture was analyzed for its potential impact. In a family where tradition is paramount, deviation is scrutinized more harshly than rebellion. But the advisors faced a dilemma. The public is relentless. The media thrives on scandal. Social media amplifies every reaction. And in the age of 24/7 coverage, controlling the narrative is a nearly impossible task. Advisors had to weigh transparency against discretion, public opinion against private strategy, and short-term crisis management against long-term consequences. Each decision was a gamble with enormous stakes. Internally, tensions ran high. Senior advisors debated the potential outcomes of Harry's return, Meghan's legal maneuvering, and the media storm. Some argued for a firm stance, maintain distance, let the couple handle their personal matters, and preserve the monarchy's dignity. Others urged proactive engagement, anticipate the narrative, control the leaks, and strategically manage public perception. The conversations were reportedly heated, with voices raised in the palace halls and urgent phone calls punctuating the quiet of night. The advisors' anxiety was not unfounded. Royal history is littered with examples where inaction or miscalculation led to reputational damage. From Edward VIII's abdication to Diana's tragic saga, the lessons are clear. Timing, messaging, and public perception are critical. In Meghan and Harry's case, the calculus was even more complicated because the divorce was paired with a potential return, a combination that could exacerbate tension, fan media speculation, and challenge the monarchy's authority. Beyond strategic considerations, there was a deeply human element. Advisors reportedly understood that behind the legal documents and public statements were intense emotions: anger, hurt, disappointment, and defiance. They had to navigate these human dynamics while balancing protocol, public expectations, and the pressures of history. It's a tightrope walk few could manage without missteps. One surprising detail, revealed by insiders, is the extent of preparation behind closed doors. Advisors had contingency plans for multiple scenarios. What if the public backlash favored Meghan? What if Harry's return was seen as opportunistic? What if media coverage spiraled into a frenzy? Every possible outcome had been considered, analyzed, and counter-strategized. And yet, despite all this planning, Advisors reportedly admitted that the unpredictability of human behavior and public reaction meant that no plan could be foolproof. The psychological pressure on the advisors themselves cannot be understated. Royal advisors are trained to manage crises, but this situation tested their skills in unprecedented ways. They were responsible not only for mitigating immediate damage, but also for preserving long-term credibility and influence of the monarchy. Every statement they drafted, every action they recommended, and every word they communicated could affect the legacy of the family for decades. The media dimension added another layer of intensity. Leaks, speculation, and viral commentary put advisors under constant pressure. Every newspaper headline, social media post, and televised commentary had to be analyzed for tone, impact, and potential consequences. The advisors found themselves in a continuous loop, responding, reassessing, and recalibrating in real time. Their role had shifted from behind-the-scenes counselors to crisis managers, balancing legal, emotional, and reputational stakes simultaneously. Even within the royal family, tensions escalated. Advisors had to navigate delicate relationships, mediate disputes, and anticipate potential conflicts. Every conversation with family members carried the weight of history, emotion, and strategic importance. Advisors were no longer just strategists. They were mediators, negotiators, and, at times, protectors of the monarchy's public image. The palace's internal communications reportedly became a whirlwind of urgency. Messages flew between London and California, between legal teams and communications staff, all coordinated to manage both the reality of the divorce and the optics of Harry's potential return. The coordination required precision, timing, and discretion, with no room for error. But there was an even more dramatic element at play: the advisors' own personal stakes. Many had served the royal family for decades, witnessing triumphs, scandals, and crises. Their reputations, careers, and credibility were tied to the monarchy's stability. The divorce was not just a royal matter. It was a test of their own ability to navigate chaos, manage perception, and protect an institution that depended on discretion and skill. As the advisors debated, planned, and prepared, they also faced a harsh reality. Meghan and Harry were acting with independence, sometimes unpredictably. The couple's decisions could not always be anticipated, and the advisors had to constantly adapt, recalibrate, and respond. Their role was less about control and more about mitigation, guidance, and strategic intervention. And then came a revelation that reportedly stunned even the most seasoned advisors. Hidden clauses in Meghan's divorce documents, carefully designed to assert control over media narratives and public appearances, had strategic implications the palace had not fully anticipated. This wasn't just about legal settlements. It was a subtle, calculated assertion of influence. Advisors realized they were now playing defense on multiple fronts, against both public perception and private strategy. The combination of personal emotion, legal maneuvering, and public scrutiny created a perfect storm. Advisors were forced to anticipate not just what Meghan and Harry might do, but how the public, the press, and global opinion would respond. Every decision, every recommendation, carried layers of consequence, amplifying the tension within the palace walls. Yet, despite all the planning, the advisors could not fully predict the next twist. Every day brought new developments, new leaks, and new surprises. And as the world watched with bated breath, the advisors realized one unshakable truth. The monarchy was navigating uncharted territory, and the consequences of miscalculation could be historic. When Meghan Markle signed those divorce papers, the world didn't just notice. It erupted. Headlines exploded across newspapers, TV broadcasts, and social media feeds. Divorced and defiant, one tabloid screamed. Royal rift worsens, declared another. Within hours, the news became the global conversation, dominating trending topics, opinion columns, and gossip circles. But the real story wasn't just the divorce itself. It was how the media frenzy magnified, distorted, and weaponized every element of the unfolding drama. The reaction was immediate. From London to Los Angeles, newsrooms scrambled to cover every angle. The legal implications, the emotional fallout, and, most provocatively, Harry's potential return to the UK. Analysts dissected every detail, from the exact wording of statements to the timing of public appearances. Headlines weren't just informing. They were shaping perception, influencing public sentiment, and escalating tension between the couple and the monarchy. Social media amplified the intensity exponentially. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became battlegrounds for opinion, speculation, and viral commentary. Fans and critics alike debated the narrative endlessly. Some expressed sympathy for Meghan, praising her courage and agency. Others criticized her actions, accusing her of manipulation or ambition. Every meme, every viral post, every trending hashtag fed the frenzy, creating a feedback loop of attention and scrutiny. The media didn't stop at reporting facts. They interpreted, exaggerated, and sensationalized. Every minor detail of Meghan and Harry's lives became fodder for storytelling. Their past public appearances were reframed in light of the divorce. Interviews, speeches, and philanthropic work were re-examined for hidden meaning or intent. The coverage blurred the line between reality and narrative, presenting the couple's lives as a continuous, unfolding drama rather than a private family matter. Traditional news outlets and tabloids approached the story differently, but both had the same effect, shaping public perception. The tabloids, with their eye-catching headlines and sensational claims, focused on conflict, scandal, and speculation. Reputable outlets, while more measured, still analyzed implications, motives, and the broader impact on the monarchy. Both forms of coverage contributed to a sense of urgency, tension, and drama that engulfed the public imagination. Public opinion was as divided as the media coverage. Polls and surveys revealed contrasting sentiments. In some circles, Meghan was hailed as a strong, independent woman asserting control over her life. In others, she was criticized as disruptive, ambitious, or disloyal. Harry, too, became a subject of debate. Some praised his loyalty and courage, others questioned his decisions and timing. Every headline, tweet, and news segment fed into a polarized public